He told me I was too much, so I gave him to the girl he was cheating with. And took everything else. I'm writing this from the perspective of the cheater because that's what I became. 3 months ago, I discovered my husband's affair through a text that popped up while he was in the shower. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Sarah's working late again. I should have confronted him. Instead, I decided to destroy him first. We'd been married 6 years. No kids, thank God. He'd been telling me I was too much for months. Too emotional, too demanding, too clingy. When I'd ask about his late nights and weekend work emergencies, he'd roll his eyes and say I was being paranoid. The gaslighting was so subtle I almost believed I was losing my mind. Her name was Jessica. 24, blonde, worked in his marketing department. Everything I wasn't anymore. I found their messages going back 8 months. Hotel receipts charged to his personal card. Photos of them at restaurants I'd begged him to take me to. He was living a whole other life while telling me I needed to work on myself. My friends had been planting seeds for months. You deserve better than someone who makes you feel small. A real man wouldn't constantly criticize you. Maybe you should focus on your own happiness. They didn't know about Jessica yet, but they could see what his emotional abuse was doing to me. I was disappearing, becoming smaller and quieter with each year overreacting. The first time I met David at the coffee shop near my office, I told myself it was just venting to a friend. He was recently divorced, understood what it felt like to be made to feel inadequate by someone who was supposed to love you. He listened when my husband wouldn't. He made me feel seen when my husband made me feel invisible. David would text me during my husband's work trips with Jessica. Sweet messages, photos of his day, questions about mine. Everything my husband used to do before he decided I wasn't worth the effort. When David kissed me in his car after our third coffee date, I kissed back and felt alive for the first time in months. I became strategic about my revenge. Started documenting everything. Screenshots of my husband's lies, photos of credit card statements, recordings of him telling me I was imagining things while he was literally texting her. I hired a private investigator with money from our joint savings. Got photos of them together, timestamps, locations. The affair with David escalated quickly. Hotel rooms during lunch breaks, weekend trips when my husband was working with Jessica. I'd come home from spending the day in bed with another man and my husband would barely look up from his phone. Sometimes Jessica was probably texting him while I was standing right there. I told David everything. About the gaslighting, the cheating, the way my husband made me feel worthless. David said I deserved so much better. That my husband was an idiot for not appreciating what he had. For the first time in months, I felt valuable. I felt wanted. I felt like I mattered. 3 weeks into my affair, I realized I didn't love my husband anymore. The man who used to make me laugh, who I'd built dreams with, was a stranger who'd been systematically destroying my self-worth while fucking his coworker. I wasn't cheating to save my marriage. I was cheating to end it on my terms. I planned the confrontation perfectly. Invited Jessica to our house for dinner under the pretense of getting to know my husband's work friends better. Told my husband I was trying to be less suspicious, more trusting. He was so relieved he actually hugged me. The first physical affection he'd shown me in weeks. When Jessica arrived, I had printed photos spread across the dining room table. Hotel receipts. Text screenshots. Bank statements showing charges at restaurants and jewelry stores I'd never benefited from. My husband walked into the room and saw his entire double life laid out like evidence at a crime scene. I know about everything, I said calmly. And now she does too. Jessica went pale. My husband started stammering excuses. I held up my hand just like he used to do when he dismissed my concerns. I'm done being too much for you. You can have each other. But you can't have me anymore. The divorce was swift and brutal. My lawyer used every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The affair, the financial deception, the emotional abuse disguised as relationship advice. My husband tried to claim we'd grown apart naturally. The photos and recordings said otherwise. I got the house, half his retirement, and enough alimony to start over comfortably. He had to liquidate his stock options to pay me out. Jessica dumped him 2 weeks after the confrontation when she realized he'd been lying to her too, telling her I was crazy and controlling while she was just as manipulated as I was. My husband moved in with his brother, lost half his assets, and watched his reputation at work crumble when word spread about his affair with the subordinate. HR investigated. He kept his job but got demoted. Jessica transferred departments and wouldn't speak to him. The woman he'd thrown away his marriage for wanted nothing to do with him. David and I lasted exactly 1 month after my divorce was finalized. Turns out he was looking for a broken woman to fix, not a strong one who'd fixed herself. When I stopped needing his validation, he lost interest. I wasn't devastated. I'd used him just as much as he'd used me. We were both rebounding from marriages that had made us feel worthless. The hardest part wasn't losing my husband. It was realizing how much of myself I'd lost trying to be less too much for him. I'd stopped seeing friends he thought were too loud. Stopped wearing clothes he said were too revealing. Stopped expressing opinions he found too emotional. I'd become a shadow of myself to accommodate a man who was cheating anyway. My friends rallied around me after the divorce. They'd seen what he was doing to me, how small I'd become. They celebrated when I started speaking up again, wearing bright colors, laughing too loud in restaurants. Everything he tried to suppress came flooding back once he wasn't there to criticize it. 6 months later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked tired, older, defeated. He tried to apologize, said he'd made a mistake. That he missed me. That Jessica had been a fantasy and I was real. I looked at this man who'd spent years convincing me I was too much and realized he'd never been enough. I didn't feel guilty about the affair anymore. He'd been cheating long before I started. He'd been emotionally unfaithful, investing his energy in making me feel inadequate while pursuing someone else. My affair was just the final nail in a coffin he'd been building for months. The house feels bigger now. Brighter. I redecorated everything, erasing his influence from every corner. Bought art he would have called too colorful. Adopted a dog he would have said was too much work. Started taking salsa lessons he would have called too attention-seeking. I'm dating again, but differently. I watch for the subtle signs now. The eye rolls. The dismissive comments disguised as helpful feedback. The slow erosion of self-confidence that happens when someone decides you're too much instead of recognizing they're not enough. My ex-husband taught me that some people will try to dim your light instead of dealing with their own darkness. He called me too much because he was too little. Too insecure to handle a woman who knew her worth. Too weak to end our marriage honestly instead of slowly poisoning it. I don't regret the affair. I regret staying so long with someone who made me believe I needed to be less than I was. I regret all the times I apologized for being human. I regret shrinking myself for someone who was never going to appreciate the space I made for him. Some men can't handle women who are too much. That's their limitation, not your flaw. I'd rather be too much for the wrong person than not enough for myself. And I'd rather be alone than with someone who sees my intensity as a problem instead of a gift. He was right about one thing. I was too much. Too much for him. Too much for his small world and smaller ambitions. But I was never too much for someone who deserved me. I just had to stop settling for someone who didn't.